Hello friends, welcome back to the shop. We are about to begin the restoration work on this Kiko Countryman block meerschaum pipe. And the first thing I'm going to do, the first thing that I try to always do with when I need to restore a pipe that needs reaming, is I will ream the pipe. And the reason I do that first is it's a dirty, messy process, and if you're going to clean the outside of the pipe, you want to get all the dirty, messy processes out of the way first, because otherwise you might have to clean it a second time. Now, as I mentioned, I can't use a reamer because I don't want to apply any pressure to these outer walls, well, to the walls, because I don't want to risk cracking the meerschaum. So what we need to do then, and I'll show you again, it's not terrible. So it does need to be reamed because there should not be any cake in a meerschaum, but it's not like we got to take out a ton of cake here. And one of the nice things is it seems to be fairly concentrated towards the top, so we don't have to do too much work at the bottom of the bowl, which is good. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to use what I call a reaming knife. Now, some people use pocket knives, pen knives, all sorts of things. This is a knife that I actually made myself a long time ago. It's not a good knife. I don't want to give you the impression that that I'm a knife maker or anything. As you can see, it's rather chunky, and the blade is actually rather poorly formed. I made this just fooling around years and years ago, and it turns out that it just makes a really nice reaming knife for cases like this where you can't use a reamer. And what I like most about it is this big chunky handle, so it's easy for me to hold and control, and I can set it down and it doesn't roll away or anything, so it's just ideal. But any sort of small pocket knife or pen knife would be good. One thing I will caution you on if you're ever doing this yourself is be careful with the tip. This has a relatively rounded tip on it, as you can see. If this was very pointy, I wouldn't use it because there's a chance that you can jab into the bottom of the pipe as well. Of course, with briar, that's not so much of an issue, but with meerschaum, it's a worry. Now, I'm not going to do a lot of this on camera because I need to be able to look down in the bowl as I'm doing it, and it's a bit awkward. But the basic idea is I'm going to bring the knife in and just kind of scrape. Now, the angle that I'm using is not, I'm not at a 90-degree angle to the inside of the bowl like that, and I'm certainly not doing this because then you run the risk of carving on the bowl. I'm holding it something like this, about a 45-degree angle, and just scraping. And I will do that and just try to do that evenly around the entire circumference of the bowl. This is going to take some time, so I'm not going to do much harder than what you're seeing right now. So it is definitely going to take some time to get this done, but that's okay. It'll be well worth it because in the end we'll be able to have this back to its normal dimensions, and it will be much less likely to develop a crack if that carbon cake is not as thick. The reason it could crack is the same reason that briars can crack if you let the cake get out of control, and that's that the carbon cake reacts differently to the heat than the briar, or in this case than the meerschaum will. So you're going to get expansion and contraction of both parts, temperature dependent, but they'll expand and contract differentially, and that can lead to some stresses that ultimately will cause a crack. So we want to avoid that. Okay, so I will be doing this, and then I will be just using some maybe 320, 400 grit sandpaper, mostly just to smooth out the remaining cake and smooth out any inconsistencies in the bottom of the bowl, but a very light sanding. And I'll bring you back when that's all done. Well, folks, that was an awful lot of work because you have to do this slowly and very carefully. But we have managed to basically restore the size of the tobacco chamber, and we've got the walls relatively smooth and pretty much ready to go. Now, if you own a meerschaum pipe or a meerschaum lined pipe and you'd like to avoid doing this, and you really should, because it's not fun. You can see how much cake I took out. It's not very much, but it was enough to occlude the pipe, prevent you from putting your finger in, and it was enough to worry that it could actually cause some cracking. You remember I couldn't get my finger much past there, and now I can put my finger all the way in. So it's much more open. It's very much smoothed out. There's a couple of little ripples in it, but I didn't want to sand too much because I didn't want to sand into the meerschaum. So I think we're in good shape. Now, if you want to avoid doing this on your own pipe, it's really simple. If you have a meerschaum or a meerschaum lined pipe, all you have to do is, after you're done smoking, you empty out the pipe, all the tobacco is gone, pipe's cool. Just take a simple, sorry that's too bright, simple paper towel, and just kind of wad it up and cram it down in there and just give it a couple of turns. And when you do that, this is just picking up some dust from the reaming, but when you do that, any residual tobacco, any residual carbon that's sitting on the surface of the bowl will come off on the paper towel, and that will greatly limit any cake buildup in the pipe. Now, I'm not a meerschaum expert. I actually have worked on a few of them, but I know very little about meerschaum. I don't smoke them very often myself, but that's what I've been told to do by others, and it's what I've done on the meerschaums that I do have, and it's worked wonderfully. So just that quick wipe out with a paper towel really can save you a lot of time. Let's get this out of the way and talk about the next step. So I have a choice now of working on the stem or the stummel next. I think I'm going to go with the stummel first, because that's probably going to be the most challenging part. So the next step is going to be to work on cleaning the inside of the pipe, the shank and the stem. And we're going to do that just using traditional pipe cleaners. And first off, let's make sure the pipe cleaner goes all the way through, and it does with no problem. Actually, that passes really nice. And as you can see, it's not anything unusual in terms of the buildup in there. So that's good. We won't have to do anything too aggressive. One of the things I should point out about meerschaum, and this may be sort of an old wives' tale, I don't know, but I've heard that not block meerschaum, but pressed meerschaum is actually very sensitive to moisture, to the point where if you were to put some water on this pipe cleaner and run it through, you'd actually wind up starting to eat away at the internal shank here. So obviously you want to be careful. Now that may or may not be true, but from a more practical point of view, you don't want to put a lot of chemicals or even water on the meerschaum, because it is so porous and it's going to absorb, and that's just going to bring problems down the road. I would imagine, and I'm now speaking with absolutely no knowledge, but I would imagine that if you soaked water into this and then you lit it, it would, steam could form in pockets, and you could have all sorts of problems with cracking and whatnot. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think just to be on the safe side, you'd really want to limit the amount of liquids that you're using when cleaning this. So normally I would put some alcohol rather, on the pipe cleaner and clean it. I'm not going to do that for the stummel. Unfortunately, it's pretty clean, so that's not going to be too much of a problem. I'm going to switch to a bristled pipe cleaner. Yeah, that's actually very clean. Good job there, Classic Flat Tire. The other thing we got to be careful about is that we've got threads cut in here, and I don't know if that's meerschaum or if that's some sort of an extension or insert that's been put in there. But obviously we don't want to damage those threads. But these bristle pipe cleaners are fairly benign. Alright, well that's going to do it. That was actually fairly clean to begin with. We reamed it. So for now I'm going to set the stummel aside and turn my attention to the stem. Now you've seen me do plenty of stem cleaning. Actually I'm going to set the stummel very much to the side so that it's not in my way here. You've seen me do stem cleaning before, and I've got a series on stem cleaning, so I'm not going to give you a lot of details on this. I will use some alcohol on the stem, both inside and outside. Get the inside very clean, get most of the loose stuff off the outside, and then I will switch to sanding. And for this pipe we're going to probably start around 320 grit and be very careful around the stampings, and then move on to up to 600 grit, and then probably go through some of the micro mesh pads before buffing. So it's going to be a lot of sanding, which is common for a stem restoration like this. Now one thing that we want to be careful about with the stem has to do with the fact that we can't sand this on the stummel. So normally if this were a briar pipe, I would say that you should not sand the stem unless it's attached to the stummel. Not because you're going to decrease this diameter relative to the diameter of the shank. I mean, the fact is we're not going to be sanding that aggressively. We're going to take very, very little vulcanite off of the diameter. But what will happen is that just because of the way you're sanding, it's going to be very difficult to not round over this edge. And if you round over this edge, it looks terrible on the pipe. It looks like there's a gap between the stem and the shank. So to avoid that, what I've done is I've taken an oak dowel and just had oak. The wood itself doesn't really matter. I chucked it in the lathe and well, first off I measured the diameter of this tenon, and that comes out to be 15/64. So I chose sorry, I don't think you can see that. So it's 15/64. So I moved down one and chose a 7/32 drill bit, faced off the end, drilled a hole in the middle, and then threaded it to accept the tenon here. So this will screw on here, and we'll basically, oops, sorry, a bit of a problem off to the side here. This will screw on here and basically will form a dummy shank for us. And that will allow us to sand this. We can clamp this dowel into a vise and hold this rigidly, and we can sand this without any fear of rounding over that edge. So I will work on that. I will clean the inside and outside of the stem, and I'll bring you back when that's done. Alright, so this is where we're at with the Kiko stem at this point. We have sanded to 600 grit. This has all been hand sanding, and as you can see, we've been able to maintain that stamping without any issue. It was quite deep. The Tanganyika one is still present, so I'm happy about that. Now, what I've learned in refinishing stems is that sometimes when they're as oxidized as this stem was, you get this weird problem where you clean it all up, you sand it, you buff it, you wax it, and the next day it's oxidized. And I don't quite understand it, except I believe there just might be some spots in here that are prone to oxidation. Maybe there's some light oxidation that's exposed, and you can't quite see it yet. It just hasn't built up to critical mass yet. So to prevent that, and also to aid in seeing spots that need some additional work, I've developed the following method. And it's really quite simple. I do a coat of mineral oil on the stem and let it sit overnight. And this is a very liberal coating. I want the entire stem to just basically be soaked in mineral oil. Mineral oil is safe, non-toxic, cheap, and it's probably the same thing as obsidian oil, although I can't prove that. And you want to make sure you get it down into that crease, the button crease. And yeah, so there's really no downside to doing this. It does take a little bit longer, but I find that first off, if there were spots on here that I had missed, then Let's see if I can find any, because I do often miss a spot. No, this actually looks pretty good. I was working on a stem the other day where this corner was oxidized, and I had missed it when I was sanding. And once you start sanding vulcanite, it all starts to look the same. You can't really tell the difference between what's oxidized and what isn't, because it's all kind of a brownish color. You put the mineral oil on, and that just stands out like crazy, because all the non-oxidized parts will be jet black, and that'll still be brown. But in this case, I think I hit everything. So that's one of the other benefits of doing this. You get to find out if you missed any spots. So it doesn't take that long. Mineral oil is readily available. It does require an overnight treatment, but that's okay. We've got other things to do. And we'll let that sit overnight, and then all that remains to do will be to use some of the micro mesh pads. We'll probably bring that up to about, I don't know, 2,000 or so. And then at that point it will be ready for the buffer. So we're very close to being done with the stem. And I think at this point I'm going to call this particular video to a close. And we'll pick up next time with cleaning the stummel, waxing the stummel, and bringing it all back together. So I hope you'll tune in for that. And until then, I will look forward to talking to you all again very soon. Goodbye now.